Have you ever witnessed a scene so unfair that your heart seemed to stop for a moment? A situation where someone, simply because they think they're too important, decides to humiliate someone who has done absolutely nothing but exist in the wrong place? If this has ever happened to you, stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you. Imagine a shopping mall parking lot, one of those busy ones in the late afternoon, where cars come and go while life rushes by. And there, in the middle of this common routine, a billionaire appears in a luxury car, gliding between the parking spaces as if he owns the world. Arrogant, impatient, he maneuvers haphazardly, without caring about those around him. In seconds, he almost hits the small car of a black woman who was trying to park quietly, simply going about her life. He gets out of the car like a movie star, but carrying the worst part of the elite who believe themselves untouchable. His steps are firm, his gaze sharp, and before he even understands what happened, he's already pointing the finger at her. He accuses, shouts, distorts the facts. He says she doesn't know how to drive, that she gets in other people's way, that people like her shouldn't even be in that parking lot. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt that mixture of injustice, shame, and powerlessness burning inside while someone tries to belittle you publicly? The woman remains motionless for a few seconds, surprised by the sudden aggression. Her gaze fills with embarrassment, but also with something deeper, something that anyone who has suffered humiliation recognizes immediately, that silent effort to keep the pain from overflowing. She doesn't respond. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't retaliate against his arrogance. She simply observes, takes a deep breath, and tries to remain composed while the people around her stop to watch. And it is precisely there that public humiliation gains strength, when the world becomes the audience. The billionaire, feeling even more powerful in her silence, continues. He mocks her simple clothes, the calm way she tries to explain what happened, and insists she learn to park before leaving the house. It's one attack after another, driven by the certainty that his wealth protects him from any consequences. With each sentence, he reaffirms what he believes to be an absolute truth, that social status defines character. Little does he know that he is about to learn one of life's most important lessons, and perhaps you identify with that feeling of watching an injustice grow before your eyes. Perhaps you have already felt that silent outrage when someone is despised simply because of their appearance, color, origin, or simplicity. These are moments that mark us, that make us reflect on how much prejudice still breathes in everyday gestures, in words that hurt, in attitudes that reveal more about the one who humiliates than about the one who is humiliated. But before you jump to conclusions, take a deep breath with me. This story is just beginning. The parking lot seems like an ordinary setting, but it's there that one of the most impactful social twists you'll hear about today unfolds. And it's no exaggeration to say that when the truth comes out, even you might feel a chill. So stay with me, because what happened after this public humiliation reveals something much bigger than a simple traffic conflict. And when you realize who this woman really is and the role she plays in that shopping mall, everything changes. Now that you've seen the beginning of this injustice, let's move on to the moment when her silence begins to speak louder than any words, and where the story takes a turn the billionaire never imagined. And while that woman stood there beside her car, trying to maintain her dignity in the face of such an unwarranted attack, something invisible seemed to grow in the air. It was that silent tension that forms when everyone realizes an injustice is happening, but no one knows exactly how to react. Some observers looked away, others stared at the scene with discomfort, as if the billionaire's pride filled every corner of that parking lot. And perhaps you, watching this now, can feel some of that weight too, because situations like this awaken deep memories, recollections of moments when someone tried to belittle you, or someone you love. And that's exactly why this kind of story touches so many People, because it shows what happens when respect ceases to exist, when power is used as a weapon, when arrogance tries to erase the humanity of the other. By the way, before the story moves on, let me ask you something very simple but important. Have you ever experienced something like this? Or have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly just because they seemed less in someone else's eyes? If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. I read every message carefully, and often it's precisely your stories that inspire new content and strengthen this community that grows with each video. And since we're talking about strength, let me tell you a truth you might not know. When you like this video or subscribe to the channel, it's not just a click. It's like you're saying, I want this kind of message to keep circulating. I want more people to reflect on empathy, respect, and justice. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content that promotes reflection and often emotional healing. So, if you're feeling this connection now, if this story is touching you in some way, leave a like and subscribe. It helps much more than you imagine, and I'm truly happy to have you walking alongside me. And while you're doing that, we return to that scene in the parking lot, because something much bigger was about to happen, something that would completely transform the dynamic between that arrogant billionaire and the woman he tried to humiliate. Her calmness, which seemed like weakness in his eyes, was actually the harbinger of a twist that no one, absolutely no one, there was expecting. She was still there, firm, even with a tight chest and a burning sensation in her throat. The billionaire had stepped back for a moment, perhaps satisfied with his own performance, perhaps believing he had won the argument he himself had invented. But the truth, that hidden truth that no one there perceived, was that she was not defeated. Quite the opposite. There was something in her eyes, a silent, almost imperceptible gleam, that revealed a strength difficult to explain. It was like observing someone who, despite being attacked, remains whole because they know their own worth. She took a deep breath, one of those long sighs that seem to organize the soul. This wasn't just self-control. It was a decision, a conscious decision, not to allow another person's ignorance to define her emotional state. And it's interesting how often the greatest transformation happens within that silence, not in the shouting, not in the immediate response, but in the choice not to stoop to their level. Her mindset was different. Instead of reacting impulsively, she chose dignity, and that even those who don't understand feel. As she watched her car trying to catch her breath, her hand discreetly touched her purse. A quick glance would reveal only an ordinary gesture, but behind that simple movement lay a detail that would change the entire perception of the story. An elegant name tag, bearing a name many would recognize, but which she kept hidden, not out of shame, but out of poise. She never needed to prove who she was to earn respect. She knew her worth didn't depend on displays, titles, or reminders of power, and that made the billionaire's humiliation even more symbolic. He spoke loudly, tried to dominate the room, raised his arms, spread arrogance everywhere as if it were expensive perfume. But none of that made him seem strong. It was quite the opposite. Those who truly have power never feel the need to humiliate. Those who truly have authority don't need an audience. And she knew that. Her calmness wasn't submission, it was awareness. It was that firm tranquility of someone who sees behind the scenes of life and understands that each behavior reveals more about the person who practices it than about the person who receives it. Around them, some mall employees hurried past. Two of them, upon seeing the woman, slowed their pace and gave a discreet nod, almost a respectful greeting. One of them even offered a small, sincere smile, one of those that shows affection and admiration. Most people there didn't notice any of this. Everyone's attention was still focused on the billionaire's arrogant display. But for those who knew how to observe, there were already enough clues that this story had deeper layers. And it's Curious how life creates such strong contrasts. On one side, someone who believes their luxury car is their shield, that their wealth is their voice, that their surname is their passport to intimidation. On the other side, someone who carries true authority in silence. Someone who doesn't need to shout to be heard, who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, who conveys greatness even in small gestures. This woman represents that inner journey that so many people experience, the silent battle between feeling the pain and not letting it turn into shame. And perhaps that's why this part of the story resonates so deeply, because everyone, at some point, has swallowed their pain to avoid losing their own integrity, has chosen to take a deep breath instead of exploding, has chosen elegance when the situation pushed towards chaos. It's an invisible but powerful battle, a battle that shapes character, that strengthens, that reveals who we truly are when no one is paying attention. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because there's something fascinating about the way she behaves. There's no resentment in her eyes, just a kind of quiet clarity. It's as if each gesture carries a message that goes far beyond that scene in the parking lot. She wasn't just avoiding conflict. She was honoring her own history, her achievements, her journey. It was the kind of posture that stems from self-confidence built over a lifetime, a life full of challenges, difficult decisions, silent impacts, and above all, personal growth. While the billionaire talked a mile a minute, she merely adjusted a key that hung discreetly from her purse, a key that looked ordinary, but definitely wasn't. The metal gleamed with a specific detail, an engraving that only those who knew the inner workings of that shopping mall would understand. It was a symbol of belonging, of real authority, of responsibility, and, unlike the man who was trying to humiliate her, she didn't need to show any of that to be who she was. She looked around, saw some people whispering, and yet maintained her impeccable posture. There was no hatred there. There was no desire to retaliate against the humiliation. There was only firmness. There was truth. There was a force so silent that it seemed to fill all the space around her, and it was impossible not to feel empathy, not to connect, not to recognize in that silence a story of overcoming, resilience, and awareness of self-worth. And that's precisely why, when she took a small step to the side, readjusting her bag on her shoulder, something changed in the atmosphere. It was almost imperceptible, but anyone paying attention would notice. The environment seemed to align around her, as if the energy of the place were influenced by that calm, strong, and unwavering presence. It was the pure manifestation of emotional autonomy, one of those revelations that emerge between the lines, one of those truths that only time makes clear. And as that feeling took shape, something new began to approach, like an important piece about to enter the scene, but that will make sense later. Before we continue, tell me one thing. Comment, "This makes sense to me," just so I know you're walking this journey with me. The billionaire walked down the parking garage aisle as if the ground belonged to him. Each step had an impatient rhythm, a kind of contained anger that fed on his own ego. He didn't look to the sides, didn't observe anyone. He just moved forward, huffing, like someone who believes that any obstacle should instantly bend. When he reached the security post, he slammed his hand on the counter hard enough to make the guard's radio vibrate. The guard, a man accustomed to dealing with small daily conflicts, politely looked up, but seeing the billionaire's expression, he realized that this would not be a simple problem. The billionaire began speaking without giving anyone time to respond. His voice, loud and firm, echoed as if he were addressing an invisible audience. He pointed behind him, in the direction where he had left the black woman, and repeated that she had blocked his path, ruined his arrival experience, and put his car at risk. He exaggerated so much that his arguments began to lose logic, transforming a near incident into something comparable to a personal affront. The security guard cautiously tried to ask for details, but was practically run over by the avalanche of arrogant words that the billionaire spewed relentlessly, And the most curious thing was the contrast. While he dramatized as if he had faced a disaster, the woman remained distant, withdrawn, silent, reorganizing her own thoughts. The difference between the two seemed to further amplify the hidden truth of that situation. Who was really out of control? Who was really causing a negative impact there? Who really needed someone to blame? His arrogance wasn't just a reaction, it was a pattern. A reflection of a mindset built on the idea that his problems are always bigger than others, that his needs are the absolute priority. When the billionaire realized the security guard wasn't reacting with the kind of submission he expected, he raised his voice. He began threatening to sue them all, claiming that the parking conditions allowed careless people to obstruct the entrance of important clients. The phrase came out so laden with contempt that even the security guard swallowed hard. He didn't want conflict. Nobody wants to argue with someone so influential, but he also couldn't ignore the growing discomfort that permeated every word the man spoke. Still, he hesitated. He didn't know how to intervene without losing his job. This is the kind of moment that reveals the inner workings of human behavior. On one side, the force of social pressure. On the other, the silent courage of those trying to balance justice and survival. It's an internal conflict that so many professionals face, making the right and risky decision or following the path of obedience to preserve stability. The billionaire seemed to sense this hesitation, and, as predators do when they detect weakness, he advanced even further. He crossed his arms, leaned slightly forward, and cast that look that attempts to intimidate through the weight of status, the kind of look that tries to remind the other person how much they are nobody. The security guard took a deep breath, aware that he was treading on delicate ground. He tried to explain that he needed to assess the situation before taking any action, but the billionaire wouldn't listen. He demanded immediate action. He wanted someone to approach the woman, reprimand her, hold her accountable for something that, deep down, he himself had provoked with his reckless driving. His need to be right was so great that he seemed willing to turn the episode into a complete spectacle, just to reinforce his image of superiority. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what was happening there wasn't just about traffic, nor about pride. It was about the psychological impact certain people try to exert when they feel contradicted. The billionaire wasn't seeking justice, he was seeking reaffirmation. He needed the world around him to confirm the narrative he had invented for himself, that he is a victim, that he was wronged, that he has a right to absolute obedience. This type of attitude stems from a distorted journey built upon selfish decisions and perceptions shaped by extreme privilege. He wasn't just angry, he was reenacting a truth he believed to be immutable. I command, you obey. Meanwhile, the woman's image remained firmly in the minds of those observing. There was something fascinating about the way she remained present, yet without crumbling. Those who saw her from afar might not have noticed the subtlety of the revelations emerging in her gestures, the way she held her purse close to her body, how she kept her spine straight, how she analyzed her surroundings without showing fear. It was a silent transformation happening there, within her and around her. It was as if each harsh word the billionaire uttered served to further reaffirm her decision not to react in kind. And this created a powerful, almost cinematic contrast. The security guard, who had previously seemed intimidated, began to change his expression gradually. His growing unease was perceptible, a mixture of tension and restrained indignation. Despite his attempts to maintain professional neutrality, he couldn't help but notice that something was profoundly wrong with the customer's behavior. There was a stark dissonance between the dramatic version he was telling and what had actually seemed to have happened. And this detail, the silent perception of someone witnessing the truth without being able to speak, made the situation even more profound. Each new verbal attack from the billionaire created a kind of emotional spiral that pulled everyone around him in. People started to notice. Curious glances appeared in the corners. Discreet whispers echoed. It was as if the whole scene transformed into an improvised stage, where he acted as the protagonist of a play that only he believed in. But the more he insisted on playing the powerful victim, the more evident it became that his arrogance was unintentionally exposing him. Because there is an invisible limit to human behavior, and, when crossed, it reveals things that the person tries to hide. And while all this was happening, important details remained in the air, ready to reveal themselves at the right moment. The special key in her bag, the subtly concealed badge, the respectful greetings from the employees. Each element formed small pieces of a puzzle that was still far from being understood by the billionaire. He continued to insist on punishment, demanding immediate action, believing his version was irrefutable. But the truth, that greater, deeper, and inevitable truth, was already beginning to prepare to emerge. And before we continue, leave a comment below just so I can feel you're walking this journey with me. Right, I'm on this journey too. The administration door wasn't imposing, but at that moment it seemed to carry a border-like energy, as if everything that was about to happen inside would completely change the course of that story. The billionaire entered first, still gripped by the feeling that he was about to correct an injustice that only existed in the narrative he had created. His impeccable suit contrasted with his tense, impatient gaze, almost anxious for confirmation of his power. He walked to the reception desk and crossed his arms, convinced that simply presenting his version would be enough to make people rush to serve him. The mall manager stood there waiting, trying to maintain his composure. He knew the type of person he was dealing with well, people accustomed to giving orders, demanding privileges and threatening lawsuits when not promptly obeyed. But there was something different about this case, something that unsettled him. The billionaire talked too much, described the situation as a serious dispute, used strong words, laden with contempt. The more he spoke, the clearer the dissonance became between his exaggerated discourse and the reality that others had perceived. The manager, however, limited himself to listening, because he knew that the real piece of the puzzle in this conversation had not yet entered the scene. And then, while the billionaire insisted on projecting his authority, the door opened again. The sound was light, soft, but it had an immediate impact on the room. The woman entered with calm, controlled steps, carrying a presence that seemed to illuminate the space. There was no arrogance in her, no urgency, no need to impose herself, just a quiet firmness, the kind that comes from someone who knows exactly who they are. The manager stood up immediately, followed by all the employees in the room. The gesture was almost automatic, natural, as if it were part of a silent ritual of respect. And it was precisely this collective movement that made the billionaire turn his face away, confused. She stopped a few steps ahead, without looking away, without hesitating. And in that instant, when all attention converged on her, a revelation began to take shape, not through words, but through the atmosphere. The billionaire still didn't understand. His expression oscillated between surprise and irritation, as if trying to process why this was happening. To him, that woman was just an obstacle, someone who didn't know how to drive, someone he had publicly attacked. He would never have imagined that he could be facing someone far above his own social hierarchy. The manager finally broke the silence, his voice choked with respect. "Madam Owner, thank you for coming so quickly." Those words, spoken with such clarity and reverence, fell across the room like a stone into a calm lake. The billionaire froze. All the speech he had prepared, all his threats, all his assumptions, evaporated before that sentence. His hands, which had been steady, began to tremble slightly. He tried to maintain his composure, but he no longer had control over his own expression. It was clear that something inside him was crumbling. She, on the other hand, remained serene. Her eyes met his, And in that brief instant, the hidden truth was finally revealed. He had humiliated the owner of the shopping mall. The person he had called careless, reckless as a nuisance was precisely the one who managed every inch of that place. And more than that, she was the mind behind important decisions, robust investments, and significant expansions that made that mall one of the most profitable in the region. But there was yet another revelation, one that not only reverses the story, but also reveals deep layers of what went on behind the scenes. Elegantly, she approached the table, placing the key and badge on the counter. The light reflected off the metal, revealing details the billionaire could never ignore. And then, with almost surgical calm, she said, "I remember you, because it's not every day someone tries to persuade me to accept such an aggressive offer." She paused briefly, just long enough for him to swallow hard. "Months ago, you tried to buy part of this venture. You said I lacked vision, that my decisions were too small for the potential here." Another silence, heavier than before. "I refused." The billionaire opened his mouth but couldn't utter a sound. The humiliation that had begun in the parking lot now returned to him with multiplied force. The difference was that this time there was no laughing audience, no empty victory, no displayed power. There was only the truth, naked, straightforward, undeniable. That woman he had tried to belittle was, in fact, the one who sustained the structure in which he stood. He depended on her. He entered there as a client, while she entered as a leader. His entire narrative of superiority had crumbled before a single piece of information. The manager, realizing the situation, remained respectfully silent. Everyone in the room knew they were witnessing a powerful moment, one that reveals someone's true nature. The mall owner didn't raise her voice, didn't mock, didn't retaliate with humiliation. She simply stood firm and clear, showing that dignity is not negotiable, and that real power doesn't need to shout to be perceived. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's something fascinating about this kind of revelation. When the truth comes out, it doesn't just dismantle someone's misguided narrative. It exposes the inner journey behind that silent posture. The woman knew exactly what she carried, her achievements, her position, her history. She didn't need to prove anything in the parking lot. She didn't need to fight or confront. Her decisions had already built who she was. And when you observe this carefully, you realize how mindset shapes the behind-the-scenes of life. While the billionaire believed that strength was synonymous with shouting, she understood that real strength is synonymous with self-control. While he sought domination, she carried purpose. While he acted to assert himself, she acted from truth. And this contrast is what makes this story so powerful. Because in the face of that scene, the humiliation was reversed in a natural, inevitable, almost poetic way. Not out of revenge, but simply through the exposure of reality. The truth always finds its way, sometimes silently, sometimes with unexpected impact. Before we continue, leave a comment below with a word to highlight this reflection. Write, "This makes sense to me." The room remained silent for a few seconds, as if the air were too heavy to move. The billionaire, still pale, tried to find some rational explanation for the turn of events that had just occurred, but every attempt died before it could be put into words. It was as if his own brain refused to accept the scene before him. He, accustomed to seeing the world bow before his money, now found himself facing someone who not only did not bow, but who occupied a space he never imagined would belong to her. The woman shifted her gaze to the table for a moment and adjusted her key and name tag, as if resuming her usual routine. The simple gesture contrasted sharply with the emotional chaos the billionaire carried within him. When she looked at him again, there was gentleness in her gaze, not pity, not superiority, but a quiet, almost pedagogical firmness. She took a deep breath before speaking, as if she were about to open a door to a deeper understanding, and that is exactly what she did. In a serene tone, She explained that she had no intention of harming him, suing him, or returning the humiliation she had received. She said in no uncertain terms that she held no grudge, because she knew that carrying hatred only weighs down the one who carries it. But she also made it clear that attitudes like his were the reason why so many human relationships deteriorate, so many businesses fail, and so many seemingly powerful men end up alone, defeated by their own arrogance. Those words weren't spoken as an attack, but as truth, a raw yet necessary truth. She explained that throughout her journey, she had learned something money never teaches: the importance of treating people with dignity. She said that behind any great success, there is always respect. Respect for people, for stories, for processes, and that without that, any wealth is just a facade, a beautiful shell on the outside, empty on the inside. The billionaire swallowed hard, because each word seemed to pierce layers of resistance he had built up over the years. She continued, explaining how decisions made with empathy build stability, while decisions guided by ego create ruins. The transformation she carried didn't come from titles or possessions, but from the mindset she cultivated at each stage of her life. She spoke of moments when, even as the owner of that shopping mall, she chose not to flaunt her power to assert herself, because she knew that true greatness doesn't require spectacle. And then, looking directly at him, she concluded with the most profound lesson of all: humility is the only wealth that no one can take away from you. The billionaire looked away. It was clear that those words had struck him with a force that didn't come from the volume of her voice, but from the truth they carried. He tried to regain his composure, but he had nowhere left to lean on. The expensive suit didn't protect him. His family name didn't sustain him. His wealth didn't defend him. For the first time in a long time, he found himself confronted not by someone who wanted to bring him down, but by someone who simply saw who he truly was. And that had an even deeper impact. She then took a step back, a gesture that signaled the conversation was over. There was no reprimand, no formal punishment, no revenge. There was only clarity. She gave a slight nod to the manager, who understood the message immediately, and began to leave. Her elegance was so natural that it seemed to fill the space with a reverent calm. The billionaire remained motionless for a few seconds, caught between shame and the sudden awareness of his own insignificance. When he finally moved, it was to leave silently, almost shrinking, unlike the inflated figure who had entered minutes before. As he walked down the hallway back to the parking lot, the change in his gait was palpable. The arrogant haste and air of superiority were gone. There was hesitation, reflection, perhaps even regret. Each step felt heavy, as if he were carrying the weight of all the impulsive decisions and hostile actions he had ever taken in his life. He crossed the space where he had once yelled at her, and the memory of that moment now seemed so small in the face of the revelation he had received. There was no one there to laugh at him, but even so, the feeling of exposure was unavoidable. And as he left, the woman took another route, entering the elevator reserved for administration. Her posture remained impeccable, not because she needed to prove anything, but because it was a natural part of who she was. The elevator door closed smoothly, and for a moment it was possible to feel that she carried within her years of character building, wise choices, and the silent strength of someone who knows her own history deeply. Her day would continue as normal: meetings, decisions, analyses, adjustments. Her routine would not be interrupted by that scene, but something within her had become even more solidified: the certainty that dignity speaks louder than any humiliation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there is a rare beauty in observing how truth, when revealed with elegance, can transform atmospheres, mindsets, and even destinies. The lesson she left wasn't just for the billionaire. It was for everyone who witnessed the scene, including us. It reminded us that the way we treat people builds bridges or walls, And more than that, it reinforces the idea that true power lies in internal choices, in emotional decisions, in the ability to act with humanity even when provoked. The humiliation had been reversed not by force, but by truth, not by shouting, but by firmness, not by revenge, but by conscience. And this turnaround has a profound emotional impact because it reminds us that life always finds a way to give back what we offer to the world. Sometimes early, sometimes late, but it gives back. And when we see a story like this unfold, we feel relief, justice, emotion, and above all, inspiration. Before we continue, leave a comment below with a phrase to highlight this powerful reflection. Write, "This makes sense to me." And if you've made it this far, it's because this story spoke to you in some way, perhaps because of the injustice, perhaps because of the unexpected twist, perhaps because of the silent strength of that woman who transformed humiliation into true authority. And that's why I want to extend a light invitation, almost like continuing a good conversation after coffee. If this type of content enriches you, if it makes you reflect on mindset, choices, and how we treat each other, subscribe to the channel. That way you can continue walking with me through these stories that touch, inspire, and, in some way, change us from within. And before you go, leave a comment here so I know you followed this journey to the end. Write, "I'm with you until the end." I love seeing who stayed until the very last second because it shows how much this message resonated with you. Oh, and leave a like too. Not as an automatic gesture, but as that silent signal that you connected with this narrative and want to see more profound stories like this come to life here. And since you stayed until the end, there's a video over here that really complements this conversation. Click and continue with me there. We still have a lot to explore together.